It's all quiet in the underground bunker. Doors closed, locks bolted. But the Great One isn't just resting on his laurels. He's making sure your weekend is even better by giving you his best. This is the best of Mark Levin.
I've been grinding my teeth to get behind this microphone, and I want to thank you all for being there. The media, the Democrat Party, the ruling class that runs this country will do anything to hold on to power. They don't care if Kamala Harris has the IQ of a walnut. They don't care if she flips and flops and flips again like a flounder on the ocean beach. They don't care. They lied about Biden and then pretended they didn't. Then they removed him when his numbers were unsustainable. Then you installed her without a single vote from an American citizen, without a single vote from a Democrat. The American media have done this before. They covered for Woodrow Wilson when he had a debilitating stroke and was utterly and completely dysfunctional, and his wife ran the country for a year and a half. They did the same when Franklin Roosevelt ran for his fourth unprecedented term like a dictator. They reported him to be in excellent health when he was dying from the moment the first vote was cast, and he died in office. They lied about John Kennedy's conditions. And they are lying to you right now. They lied about Joe Biden day in and day out, regardless of what you saw and what you heard. Because the media in America don't represent the American people. They represent a part of the population. They represent the Democrat Party base. They come from the Democrat Party base. George Stephanopoulos, Jake Tapper, Dana Bash, if that is her name, MSNBC, CNN are loaded with Democrat Party operatives and activists, the most radical Marxist Islamist professors and guests. They don't represent you, the American people. The New York Times, you expect them to print the truth? The New York Times lied about Stalin and the slaughter of the Ukrainians in 1932. The New York Times covered up the Holocaust until 1944, when most European Jews were already exterminated. The New York Times helped to install Castro, a mass murdering genocidal communist who they portrayed as a small d Democrat. And now they all want you to believe that Kamala Harris isn't Kamala Harris. And so they pour their own opinions, their own objectives, their own ideologies into a vessel, into a woman who is not smart, into a woman who is unaccomplished, in a woman who shouldn't be anywhere close to the presidency, let alone the vice presidency, into a vice presidential candidate from Minnesota who's a pervert, who's a liar, who went AWOL. The American media are the Pravda media. Putin would be proud if he had such a state-run media. The American media are the Al Jazeera media of Qatar. Qatar would be proud if they had such a state-run media. The media in America have destroyed the entire notion of a free press. In recent decades, the corporatists, the massive global corporations, have taken over these news platforms. They don't serve America's interests by giving us the facts and letting us make the decisions. Again, the American media is not just the Democrat Party media, it's the Democrat Party base media. And the Democrat Party base is essentially populated by two types of people: low information voters and fanatics, that is, zealots. And they serve both their interests, if you follow them closely, telling them lies, repeating them, big lies, like propagandists do in fascistic and Marxist autocratic regimes. You're not watching a small d democratic election for the most powerful office on the face of the earth. You're watching a dictator's election. This is a dictator's election where the dictator, Kamala Harris, and the dictator's party, the Democrat Party, and the dictator's media, they put out positions, they put out talking points, they put out arguments, they put out statements, they repeat them again and again and again. They air them on television, they air them on radio, they run them in their newspapers and now on social media. They say the same thing, if not similar things. And conversely and simultaneously, they do what state-run media do. They do what Putin's media does. They do what Al Jazeera's media does, which is censor, smear, character assassinate the opposition. They've turned J.D. Vance into Kamala Harris and Kamala Harris into J.D. Vance. They've taken a man who really lifted himself up by his bootstraps out of the poorest kind of upbringing in Appalachia, who volunteered for the Marines after 9/11, who wound up at Yale Law School, who became a successful capitalist. The American dream, the American experiment in this one individual. And they've tried to destroy him, to turn him into some kind of racist while he's married to a brown woman, to turn him into some kind of a buffoon while he's got a very high IQ. And meanwhile, they turn the racist, bigot, anti-Semite, Kamala Harris, who is surrounded by anti-Semites, who is surrounded by Hamas supporters, who is surrounded by Islamists. I don't give a damn who she's married to, and I can present you with a list, who has said the most horrific blood libels against Jews, against the Israelis, who's helped trigger the terrorism that is taking place in the Middle East today, and the death of the hostages by her words, by her absence at a congressional event for the Prime Minister of Israel. They try to turn her into something she surely is not. A statesman, a thinker, an achiever, a leader. They tell you she wasn't border czar when she was. They repeat her positions. Now she opposes taxing tips when she was the 51st vote in the United States Senate to hire 87,000 new IRS agents for the purpose, in significant part, of going after all you waiters and waitresses, the hospitality people who they said, you're not paying your taxes on your tips. You are targeted. We talked about it here a couple of years ago. She was the deciding vote. Biden signed the law. She comes out and says, I'm opposed to taxing tips. He comes out over the weekend and says, so am I. And the media play along. Why? Because they're not an American media. They're not a free press. They're the media of the Democrat Party base. They are trying to influence the low information voters and the zealots. They know it's a close election. They know it comes down to a handful of states. They don't give a crap about the 330 million Americans in this country. They are focused like a laser on 40, 50, 100, 120,000 people. That's it. That's it. Kamala Harris now says she's going to hire more border agents. Has she not been vice president for 4 years, America? Was she not the border czar? Now she says she wants to hire more border agents? She's the one who said she wants to defund ICE. Oh, no, you don't understand. Oh, okay. Now she says she wants to bring prices down. She's the one who supported the biggest, profligate, unbelievable spending in American history. Trillions of dollars in spending on the Inflation Reduction Act, the Biden-Harris Inflation Reduction Act, which was trillions of dollars to left-wing, climate change, degrowth groups. Now she tells you she wants to lower prices. No, she doesn't. How's she going to lower gasoline prices when she opposes gasoline? Oh, she doesn't oppose it anymore. You got that, Pennsylvania? You've got that, America? She wanted to shut down every fracking operation, every oil pipeline, every gas station, every gas pump. That was her position. She is now, today as I speak, supported by every radical, extremist, socialist, Marxist, anti-capitalist organization. But she says now she's for fracking. And the media say it's okay. Are we, the people, the progeny of the Revolutionary War, the progeny of Washington, Jefferson, Madison, and Franklin, the progeny of Lincoln, Reagan, the progeny of the greatest industrial might on the face of the earth, the progeny of the greatest founding document and constitution on the face of the earth? Are we going to allow ourselves to succumb to bald-faced lies, to people who will say anything and do anything and preach anything, depending on whom they're speaking to, depending on the moment, in order to seize control from you and me, in order to seize power, to confer it upon themselves and their friends, in order to prevent us from living prosperous lives and our children from living prosperous lives, telling us what kind of car we can drive, what kind of fan we can put in our house, what kind of light bulb we can put in our home, telling us the little things, the big things, and the middle things, telling us everything we must do? Are we gonna bend to this? This is a woman who has surrounded herself with people who hate America. This is a woman who has surrounded herself with people who hate capitalism. This is a woman who has surrounded herself with people who hate American citizenry. This is a woman who has surrounded herself with Soros prosecutors, with Islamists and Hamas supporters, with anti-Semites, with Iranian sympathizers. She just chose a Chi-Com, a communist Chinese special pleader to be her running mate, a pervert who doesn't believe mothers and fathers should decide what kind of genitalia their children can have if that child can get to his state in Minnesota, and you and I are supposed to stand here and believe he's some kind of a war hero, he's some kind of a moderate. It's time for joy. Don't you understand? Joy. Let him eat cake. Let him eat cake. It's not up to Donald Trump and J.D. Vance on their own. It's not up to the Republican National Committee on its own. It's not up to Fox and Conservative Talk Radio and other conservative outlets on their own. It's we the people. This is our damn country, and they're stealing it from us. They're stealing our children from us. They're destroying their futures. They're destroying the future of this country. The propagandists on TV, these filthy, poisonous, cancerous liars who call themselves Democrats. The contemptible media that uses the free press, that my ancestors fought for and your ancestors fought for, to advance an autocratic notion of what this country should be, to lie to the American people, to be demagogues and propagandists, day in friggin' day out. Are we going to succumb to this? I sure as hell hope not.
Mark Levin. making your weekend even better. This is the best of Mark Levin.
I have 20 hours of program in audio clips, articles, and so forth that I had prepared, Mr. Producer, with the audio, not one of which I've touched. I'm speaking to you from the heart, the soul, and the mind. I want to ask, in particular, poor families, and in particular minority families, how important is education to you? How important is education to improve the lot of your children? You see, it's my belief that parents want what's best for their children. It doesn't matter what race you are or anything else. You live for your children. You'll do anything for your children, anything. In the 1980s, there was a governor of Wisconsin, sort of a moderate Republican, who worked with a couple of conservative and libertarian legal groups, including a group called Landmark Legal Foundation. And Landmark Legal Foundation was representing a black delegate from the poorest area of Milwaukee, Polly Williams. What would a conservative legal group funded by conservative donors, a Republican governor, and a very liberal black delegate from the poorest part of Milwaukee have in common? Individualism. What? You see, ladies and gentlemen, every individual needs to be educated. It doesn't mean they have to be educated at Harvard or Yale. You got to be educated so you can function in a society that relies on the written word and the Declaration and the Constitution, the written word, a contract, the written word, a job application, the written word, even warnings on a ladder, to be distinguished from indoctrination and ideology. So there was a man who had an idea, and he wrote about it, I think it was 1958. His name was Milton Friedman, Dr. Milton Friedman. He was a libertarian economist, one of my great heroes. I got to meet him a few times, and rarely have I been so impressed with anybody. And he had many great ideas, and one of them was school choice. That the way to improve education, particularly for those in poor communities, especially for minorities, but people who are not necessarily minorities, but especially, will be school choice. And it took various forms, and there were various incarnations. But that is that the public school system is a Soviet-style education system. Now, what's fascinating about that, stick with me, this is important, please, is that John Dewey, who's considered the father of the modern-day public education system, literally went to the Soviet Union after the Russian Revolution, after Stalin took hold, and Stalin basically nationalized all these classrooms. And the goal was to teach everybody the same thing. Everybody was supposed to be for the best interests of the community. You know how it is. Taught the same thing, taught how to think. And so, it was basically a tool of the government. Our public education system was built upon that. The early progressive movement from the late 1800s to the early 1900s. The problem was and is that all schools aren't equal, and they're never going to be. But in poor communities, Most teachers don't want to teach in poor communities. Most teachers, smartly, don't want to teach in a dangerous community. Most teachers don't want to confront that sort of thing. Also, when it comes to funding for many of these schools, the facilities are dilapidated. They're bug and rat infested. And so not the best of the best. You're getting the worst of the worst. And so in many respects, the kid doesn't have a shot. So my attitude has always been, I'm going to be 67. My attitude has always been, since I was 13, 14 years old, not equity, but if people have a shot, they're going to embrace this country, they're going to embrace this system, and it's going to make us stronger as a people. Not class warfare, not redistribution of wealth, not centralized government, not social engineers, not DEI and all the rest of it. You understand. And so the school choice movement didn't just happen 10 years ago or 3 years ago. We began litigating this at Landmark and some other groups almost 50 years ago, 45, 50 years ago. We were opposed by the Democrat Party because of the unions. We were opposed by the AFT and the NEA and their state affiliates. We were opposed by the vast majority of Democrats, including black Democrats in these communities, who relied on funding and campaign workers from these teachers' unions. Polly Williams was a heroine. She stood up to them and she asked us if we would represent her. We said, absolutely. And we, with some other groups, we litigated this issue because the allegation was that you can't use public school, quote-unquote, government funds to fund a private education or a parochial education or some alternative to the government schools. It took years to litigate this, years. We litigated this to the Wisconsin, the Supreme Court, and went there twice. And we won. Not me, personally. Landmark and these other groups. Then it went to the U.S. Supreme Court, 2 cases. And we won. We won to make sure that poor kids could go to schools that are not necessarily down the street, but that their parents could have some say in where the money for that child would be spent. And there are different types of programs and so forth. We're still fought every step of the way by the AFT and the NEA. Every step of the way. Kamala Harris opposes school choice. Like Joe Biden, like every major Democrat in Washington, D.C. This has been the civil rights issue. You know, they talk about voter suppression. There is no voter suppression. You have the 1965 Civil Rights Act, which is often called the Voting Rights Act. Every citizen has an individual federal right of action, still, to challenge any effort to prevent them from voting. Every one. But there aren't many cases because it doesn't happen that often. But what is happening often is that the teachers' unions, the powerful Democrat politicians, the mayors, the city councilmen, and Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, who always opposed to integrating our public schools, stand in the schoolhouse doorway. I wish people would focus less on her race and more on what she has done to people in minority and poorer communities. This is the civil rights issue of our time. I've said it for 20-some years on radio. Our fingerprints are all over this effort to break the stranglehold on education so poor kids can get educated too. Kamala Harris stands in the way. Tell me what she's done for the black community. Tell me. I want to know. Not what she says. She's had powerful positions. Powerful vice president. She's done nothing. Nothing of consequence. Nothing. Now, the Jewish community, since the Democrats break people, human beings, into race and religious groups and so forth, Kamala Harris has trafficked in the most horrendous, vile, cancerous, poisonous blood libels against Jews of any politician other than Omar and Tlaib. She has defended Tlaib. She has defended Omar. The running mate she chose, Tim Walz, supports and celebrates Omar, who represents Minneapolis, Minnesota. He has endorsed her. He has provided money to her campaign. Kamala Harris's staff, you can see the things I've been posting, includes some of the most grotesque Israel haters and Jew baiters you could possibly think of. Her pastor is a bigot, in my humble opinion, and yet she still remains close to him. I have a Chabad rabbi. If he was a bigot, he wouldn't be my Chabad rabbi. You choose your pastor. You choose your priest. You choose your rabbi. They don't choose you. She has, as her national security advisor, one of the most radical, extremist, in my opinion, Iranian regime special pleaders in our government, who comes out of the Obama administration. And she is surrounded by people like this. I don't care about what I'll call window dressing Jews. I'll make that line up, whatever it is. That is, I'm married to a Jewish man, or this guy over here. None of that matters. Black people get that. Hispanic people get that. Asian people get that. Everybody understands what I'm talking about. That's irrelevant. What's relevant is substance. Who are these people? What do they believe? She openly told a group just a few days ago, you heard it, that was saying boycott Israel because effectively they're slaughtering all these Palestinians. And she said she would talk about it. Tonight, as I speak to you, the people of Israel are surrounded. By well over 100 million Palestinians and Arabs. A country of 6.5 million Jews. A country of 13 million people. 10-1. They didn't pick a fight with Gaza and Hamas. They didn't pick a fight with Hezbollah. They didn't pick a fight with the Houthis. Barely even know who the hell they were. They didn't pick a fight with Iran. Iran seeks to eradicate the Jews of the Middle East, as Hitler sought to eradicate the Jews in Europe and then worldwide. As imams in this country, as certain faculty in this country, as certain organizations in this country seek to exterminate the Jews in the United States. No politician, none, should be playing footsie with people like this. I'm not talking about Muslims and Arabs. Zuhdi Jasser, a dear friend of mine, and by God, I wanted him to win that primary, and he lost by 3,000 votes in Arizona. Shame on you folks in Arizona. I am talking about radical Islamists. Everyone knows what I'm talking about. This country has suffered from it. People have lost sons and daughters in war and in buildings and in airplanes. Let's not play games. You know what I'm talking about. Kamala Harris plays footsie with these people. The United States has suffered grievously. The world has suffered grievously. I don't care if you're talking about Moscow or Berlin, and especially in the Middle East. And they're surrounded tonight. What has Kamala Harris said tonight about the Iranians? Nothing. What has she said tonight about Hezbollah? Nothing. What has she said tonight about the Houthis? Nothing. She just announced a new hire. Another special pleader for Iran. The Muslim Brotherhood gave birth to Hamas. The Muslim Brotherhood gave birth to many of the terrorist organizations that seek to destroy the United States and the State of Israel. Hamas gave birth to a group called CAIR, C-A-I-R. CAIR has been involved in the protests as well as other organizations coordinated by Hamas, Iran, and Qatar, as well as these Democrat Party oligarchs with their money. Kamala Harris is close to CAIR. CAIR supports Kamala Harris openly. A number of these organizations do. She's very careful about how she speaks about the Islamists. She's openly vile and poisonous about how she speaks about the Israeli Jews, spewing the blood libel. And so I want to ask the Jews in this audience, are you going to stand for somebody who attacks your ancestral home, who gives at least aid and comfort in what she says to the people who want to attack them?
Mark Levin.
You're listening to the best of Mark Levin.
You know, we the people shouldn't have to beg a presidential candidate to make appearances so we can know exactly what they're thinking. I mean, if a presidential candidate is running seeking our votes, it's not enough to have the right to vote. You need to have the right to vote with knowledge. Now, the truth is, we know what Kamala Harris is. She's a Marxist Islamist. Her economic policies have been the most extreme, even more extreme than Bernie Sanders. That's not moderate. That's not little d Democrat. That's not even socialism. It is what it is. And now she will lie about them to the extent that her polling and surveys tell her she needs to lie about them. So you have an issue with Marxist Islamism plus character. She has a very low character. What do I mean by that? She knows she will say anything and do anything to get elected. And in this Marxist Islamism and low character, it is a defective trait that she shares with her media, with George Stephanopoulos, with Dana Bash. It's a defective trait she shares with all of MSNBC and CNN, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the rest of the big government Pravda, Al Jazeera, American media platforms. Deceit, lies, it's a pathology. The ends justify the means, as many communists have said, including Lenin. And that's exactly what's taking place. So we have people who say, when will she come out? When will she speak? But it's more than when will she come out? When will she speak? Which is very important. But when she does, do we believe her? That's the issue with flip-flopping. Flip-flopping means you're a liar. You either lied before or you're lying now. She hasn't had a change of worldview. She hasn't suddenly come upon facts or information or knowledge she didn't have before. She's a chameleon. She has a core belief system, but she's a chameleon in the sense that she will reveal them when she feels it's useful. She will conceal them when she feels it's useful. She will pretend she doesn't hold them anymore, or to the extent she held them, when she thinks it's useful to her gaining power. This is what autocrats do. And so I'm going to spend time right up to the moment of Election Day. For all of our affiliates, all of you listeners, wherever you may be, exposing this woman. And by the way, well, the fact that she's a woman and the fact that she's a minority, black, is very, very important to the Democrat Party and the media. It means nothing to Xi. It means nothing to Putin. It means nothing to Un. It means nothing to the Islamo-Nazis. It means nothing to the illegal aliens, the criminals on our streets. They could care less if she's a she or a he, if she's albino or black. It doesn't matter. It's the policies. And that's what should matter to you. Is she going to improve your life? Or is she going to make it miserable? Is she going to make our streets safer or more dangerous? Is she going to secure our border from fentanyl, from rapists, from illegal aliens, from murders? Or is she going to continue the Harris-Biden policies of today? I want to address several issues, but I want to start with one in particular. I said yesterday and before that the Harris-Walz ticket is the most anti-Semitic national ticket in American history. You know, it's a funny thing. Woodrow Wilson, you might think, who was one of the most horrible racists, a Democrat, a so-called progressive. He resegregated the civil service. He resegregated the military. So many things that he did I wrote about in The Democrat Party Hates America. But he was not anti-Jewish. He put the first Jew on the Supreme Court. Interesting, isn't it? Strange, but interesting. Franklin Roosevelt didn't lift a finger for blacks and was anti-Jewish. What he did to blacks, not only wouldn't he meet with them for the most part, as I've told you before, in 1940, a bipartisan bill came to him from Congress to outlaw lynching, a federal law outlawing lynching, and he wouldn't sign it. And he was condemned by a number of prominent black athletes, as a matter of fact. But you wouldn't know it listening about FDR today. You wouldn't know about listening to LBJ, about him today, that he was every bit as racist as Woodrow Wilson. Horrendous. So it is amazing when you hear that party talk about Donald Trump, who doesn't have a racist bone in his body, who's never done anything racist. All those years as an employer, as a developer, in entertainment all those years. Kamala Harris, in my view, is an anti-Semite, and I'm going to demonstrate it. Tim Walz, in my view, is an anti-Semite. I don't care that she's married to a Jew. That is irrelevant. There are anti-Semites. There are Jew haters who are Jews. Just like there are Catholic haters who are Catholic, and on and on. They exist. It's a sickness, but they exist in every ethnicity and in every religion. The fact that you marry somebody who is this or that is of no consequence. It's you, your character, your substance, what's between your ears that matters. We have a piece here in the Daily Mail. Excuse me, that was a huge mistake. The Daily Wire. Most radical anti-Semitic ticket. Elise Stefanik slams Tim Walz for appearing with anti-Israel leader. Walz rubbed shoulders with Students for Justice in Palestine founder Hatim Bazian in 2019. By Cassie Akiva. Stefanik condemned Walz for rubbing shoulders with the founder of the National Students for Justice in Palestine, is another Hamas front group. During a 2019 event, Walz was photographed with the anti-Semite scholar and JSP founder Hatim Bazian during the Council on American Islamic Relations March 2019 event on challenging Islamophobia at Metropolitan State University in St. Paul, the Washington Free Beacon reported. So CARE is a Hamas front group founded by Hamas that supported October 7th. It is a group with extremely close ties to Kamala Harris. Now let's just stop there. If we had a Republican candidate for president or vice president who had extremely close ties to the Ku Klux Klan, wouldn't that be the end of it? Wouldn't that be the end of it? This is why I say the media in America are filled with Hamas, Muslim Brotherhood supporting individuals, self-haters, anti-Americans, anti-Israel. It's who they are. And I will remind you that the New York Times was owned by a Jewish family, as it was covering up the Holocaust because Franklin Roosevelt wanted it covered up. Tim Walz condones and props up anti-Semites like the most dangerous professor in America, Hatem Bazian. Stefanik told the Daily Wire. Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, that's the most radical anti-Semitic ticket in history. She's 100% correct. Walz reportedly opened the CARE event and used his remarks to announce the formulation of an office to address Islamophobia in Minnesota. Bazian is also founder of the Anti-Israel American Muslims for Palestine, which is under investigation in Virginia for suspicions it finances terrorist activity, according to the Free Beacon. So these are the most vile, radical organizations with ties to these terrorist front groups that have connections to, involvement with, the Democrat candidates for president and vice president of the United States. The troubling anti-Semitic histories of CARE and SJP have been well documented, especially since Hamas's October 7 massacre of Israelis. CARE executive director Niwad Awad celebrated Hamas's attack, stating he was happy to see people breaking the siege and that Israel does not have the right to self-defense. Students for Justice in Palestine, we've talked about these groups, has been the driving force behind the anti-Israel encampments, the Hitler Youth Movement, on college campuses, which have led to the harassment of Jewish students and the disruption of some college graduations, and they'll be back. They're going to be back in force. Both AMP and SJP were named in a May lawsuit filed in federal court, which accuses the groups, of working to support Hamas, a U.S. designated terror organization, by acting as collaborators and propagandists, much like our media. Now, I want you to think about this. I want you to step back and think about Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. The truth is, most Americans know very little about both of them. And the media want it that way. And Kamala Harris wants it that way. But over my dead body. Walz came under fire last week after it was revealed that he hosted extremist Islamist imam. There's another one. Assad Kaman. Multiple times. Zaman met with Walz's gubernatorial office as recently as May 2023. Zaman, who is the executive director of the Muslim American Society of Minnesota, has a history of sharing his Facebook page to share Hamas press releases, anti-Semitic blogs, and a link to a piece on a website for a 2013 pro-Adolf Hitler film, the Washington Examiner just reported. A pro-Adolf Hitler film, CARE, Hamas, Students for Justice in Palestine. Who did the vetting of this man? Eric Holder. They knew all this. This is all publicly available. And Kamala Harris knew all this. She is close to many of the same organizations and has been.
Mark Levin.
The Great One makes your weekend even better. This is the best of Mark Levin.
President Trump gave a speech that was about 85% on economics, and I thought it was outstanding. It was an outstanding Trump speech on the economy and beyond. He defined Harris-Biden. He spelled out what they've done to our country. He set forth a pro-growth agenda, made clear that government is not the answer, but their fear-mongering about him blowing up Social Security and Medicare is preposterous. He said, after all, I was president for 4 years and I protected them. Trump made clear, and this is important, that Harris has been vice president and that she's still vice president. So why does she keep talking about what she's going to do if she's elected rather than what she has done and is doing? And if there's some great idea, why doesn't she get it done now? It's a great point. And he said she cannot solve the problem because she is the problem. Trump also underscored that Americans were better off when he was president than now, when Harris is vice president. That's sort of a takeoff. You're better off 4 years ago than you are today under Reagan. And he had energy. He was focused. He was on target. He's in fighting mode. And a good, really good sense of humor. Now, this is, I want you to keep in mind, a few weeks after there was an assassination attempt on the man. A few weeks after the Democrat Party and their media did a switcheroo, pulling Biden out, putting Harris in. And after Putin-like state-run media slobbering affection for Kamala Harris. And I got to thinking about a lot of this. The Democrats keep using in their media the word joy. She's joyous. They're running a joyous campaign. Look around you, ladies and gentlemen. Do people seem happy? Are people struggling? When you go to the grocery store, are people happy? They're happy at the prices? They're happy at some of the empty shelves? Do they seem happy when you pull up into the gas station and you look at the pump? Let me ask you this. Are you happy when you go to the mailbox and your bills are in there and you have to open the bills and you got to figure out what you're going to do with them? Especially your credit card bills? Are you happy? Are you joyful? Now, I spend an awful lot of time out and about, purposely, at grocery stores. The other day at the DMV, at diners. bagel places, Walmart, where have I been? Home Depot, Home Goods. And I'm watching people. They're not happy. People are stressed out. The other day, when I was at the hospital, people are stressed out. They're upset. They don't know how they're going to make ends meet. They worry about coming bills, how they're going to pay. They're worried about the future of the economy, the future of the country. They're worried about crime and open borders. They wonder what the hell's happening to their country. This isn't morning in America. Like with Ronald Reagan. That's not what it is. We read story after story about illegal immigrants raping women and children and beating other people. It's not morning in America. That's not what we're looking at. We're wondering if the America that we were born into, that our parents knew, whether our children will know the same and our children's children. The media trying to create a completely different narrative, a completely different worldview. They're trying to project something that doesn't exist. And they know it. And we know it. Like this story yesterday that we discussed and is all over the media today. Conservative media. That headlines from news articles on Google are being changed by the Kamala Harris campaign. Like she's not getting enough good, slobbering, spittle-producing media coverage. That they're changing the headlines on news articles as if this is some kind of a friggin' dictatorship to make Kamala Harris look even better. You don't do that. Number one, if you have character. Number two, if you believe in democracy. And number three, if your goal is to swindle and lie and deceive the American people. But you don't do that if it's a time of joy. You don't have to do it. It's not a time of joy. We have people in this country who are ripping down the American flag and replacing it with the Palestinian flag. With people on TV who are trashing our country left and right. We had a presidential candidate, a former president, Donald Trump, who was almost assassinated, murdered in front of our eyes. We see what happened again in Ferguson, a police officer, a black police officer fighting for his life with critical brain damage. He was thrown to the ground by protesters. Protesting what? We have Islamists and Marxists in our midst who are trying to overthrow the country. Our schools don't teach, they preach. We know what's going on. It's not morning in America. It's not a gay time. It's not a joyful time. She's running a happy campaign. She's not running any campaign. Her handlers are running a campaign. Her operatives, her pollsters. Her consultants are running a campaign. They're dropping $90 million in ads telling you how fantastic she is and how horrible Trump is right now as I speak. In 2 or 3 specific states. They're trying to create as many citizens out of their invasion that they created as humanly possible. And they are. 3.3 million new citizens in 3.5 years. And they're targeting battleground states now because they want to win by any means, by hook or by crook. They're registering people without voter ID, without proof of citizenship. That was the secret executive order that Biden signed. All of these things are being used. False headlines. Citizenship. Registration. Massive free propaganda state-run media. Massive dark money campaign ads. Because they don't trust you. They fear you. And so they seek to manipulate you. It's thought control. It's mind control. It'll work on some people. The issue is whether it'll work on enough people. It won't take many. Then they do the push polls. After weeks of nonstop, celebratory, promotional, so-called news coverage, they then conduct polls of their dirty work, and they say, wow, look at this. Kamala's neck and neck. She even has a slight lead over Trump. And so they create yet another news cycle on the polls that they take of their own propaganda. If propaganda didn't work, it wouldn't exist. It does work. All you have to do is turn on cable TV and watch the left. Endless propaganda. All aimed at you. This is all aimed at you. Aimed at your fellow citizens. The right to vote is destroyed when the voting system is manipulated by getting as many new citizens registered to vote as possible, because you know the vast majority will vote Democrat. The right to vote is eviscerated when you're registering people without proof of citizenship, without voter ID, at government welfare centers. The right to vote is eviscerated when actual information and knowledge about a candidate, Kamala Harris, is manipulated, is concealed, is changed. This is what happens in dictatorships, whether they be fascistic or Marxist. The repetition, the fiction, creating the notion of this great leader, the great Kamala, the great prosecutor. She ducks and weaves. She ducks and weaves because she doesn't want you, the American people, to know who she is. When she feels it serves her benefit, she was Joe Biden's right-hand man. And when she feels it doesn't, she had nothing to do with Joe Biden. She talks about what she's going to do, and yet she's the vice president and the president of the Senate. What has she done? And the things that they've done, they lie about. Did you know that she's an economic genius? The inflation that she, her administration, and her party created when they were handed 1.4% inflation that she's going to fix because it's Donald Trump's fault. Did you know that the latest inflation report shows that inflation didn't go up as much as they thought it might, even though the report before it went up more than they thought it would? But all of a sudden, happy days are here again. No, they're not. Go to the grocery store this evening. Go to the gas station. Nothing's changed. Nothing's changed for the American people, working class people, the middle class, the lower middle class. Nothing's changed. Do you feel optimistic about the future? I understand why Washington's optimistic. If Kamala Harris wins, Washington becomes even fatter, more bloated, wealthier, more powerful. But you don't. The opposite happens to you. The stronger Washington gets, the weaker you get. The fatter Washington gets, the thinner you get. I understand why the media are giddy. I understand why the Democrats are giddy. But the idea that the American people are giddy, or happy, or joyful, with crime going through the roof, with a wide open border, with fentanyl poisoning our communities, with war everywhere you turn, and bigger wars about to break out, with our police beaten in the streets, with judges who don't judge and do their jobs, with healthcare costs going through the roof because of the government. I don't see all this joy. Happy days are not here again. It is not morning in America.
Mark Levin.
We're giving you nothing but the best of Mark Levin.
What we're going to discuss isn't discussed in schools anymore. It's not discussed in the media anymore. Basic economics. Because for the left, the dumber the people are, the better. Richard Nixon tried wage and price controls. Whip inflation now, I think they called it. Win. They put out little buttons. It was August 1971. And he basically did it to get him through the election. And he won in 1972 by a landslide. He also destroyed the economy. And it took a long time to recover. After the stock market crash, 1929, when Franklin Roosevelt became president, he put in wage and price controls and a hell of a lot more. The Depression lasted 10 years. It was significantly prolonged. In fact, the stock market crash resulted, as Milton Friedman wrote at great length, from the tightening of the money supply when the money supply should have been loosened by the then fairly new Federal Reserve. Government has a role in all of this. And the role is usually quite poor. Now, why is that? Well, what's government? And who makes the decisions in government? The mass majority of people making these decisions don't have private sector experience. They don't have experience in buying things, supplying things, selling things, developing things, creating things, growing things, packaging things, retailing things. None. Government really is the only entity where you don't need any experience whatsoever. None. To run more and more of society. Kamala Harris has no idea. Joe Biden has no idea. None. Now, here's what happens. Let's talk about the minimum wage, okay? In California, they decided to call it a living wage. And so they jacked it up to $20 an hour. Businesses collapsed. Businesses left California. Businesses are not moving to California. California is not creating businesses. So the state is becoming poorer and poorer and poorer. Well, why is that? With the living wage. Well, first of all, who's on the minimum wage? Who's on the minimum wage? Well, students, part-time workers, people who are on the first rung of the ladder. They want to get a job and work their way up the ladder. Some people, obviously, who are raising a family. But people with all kinds of diverse economic conditions are receiving the minimum wage. They're not all poor. So when people say a living wage, that doesn't mean anything. Just throw the phrase out, a living wage. That's number one. Number two, who does it benefit? It doesn't benefit people who are looking for a job, because with a higher minimum wage, they're not going to get a job. So young people just graduating from high school, not going to college, or in college, but they want to get a job on the side, they're not going to get one. People who already have a job, a certain percentage of them are going to lose a job. Why? Because there are technologies available where executives have no choice, where business people have no choice, where somebody who owns a restaurant has no choice but to go mechanical. Those people are going to lose their jobs. Because here's the secret. Small businesses, tiny businesses, medium-sized, big business, they're not in business to hire people. They're not in business to hire people. They're in business to make money for the people who own them or invest in them. Sporting teams are not in business to pay athletes massive tens of millions of dollars. They're in business to make money. So they will pay them tens of millions of dollars if they can make money, if they can fill their stadiums, and if they can charge a certain price for the tickets. Otherwise, they're not going to make millions, the athletes. It can be the higher tier of our economy or the lowest tier of our economy. None of this is comprehended by the ideologues because they don't have any experience and don't care to have any experience. They rule by the iron fist. If you run a McDonald's franchise and the price of beef that you obtain is going up, the price of bread for rolls, hamburger roll, is going up, the price of potatoes, they're going up. You have to pass that along to the consumer if you're going to pay your employees and make a profit. It's that simple. It's that simple. You're not in business just to be in business. You're not in business to have employees. I never heard of anybody say, I'm going in business so I can hire 7 people. Have you ever heard that, Mr. Producer? Never. I want to own a football team so I can make athletes millionaires. No, that's not why you own a football team. Doesn't matter, whatever the industry is, whatever the business is. So the government comes in. They come into the McDonald's. Well, by the government, I mean a regulation from Washington, D.C., passed by politicians and implemented by bureaucrats. The bureaucrats are utterly unaffected. It won't affect their salary, their bonus, their pension, their medical care, utterly unaffected. And also, they've never run a McDonald's. Many of them perhaps never even worked in a McDonald's. Maybe they don't even go to a McDonald's. Doesn't matter. I doubt many of them have ever actually drilled for oil, too. They can't possibly have the answers because they don't understand the problem. They're driven by ideology. So if you say to McDonald's, you know, you're making these hamburger patties a little too small and the bun's a little too small and you're leaving like 2 or 3 French fries out of the bag of French fries, therefore, we're going to call that gouging. Smaller packages, smaller sandwiches, fewer French fries, same price, even higher. You're gouging. Therefore, we're going to punish you. All that does is further stress the enterprise because they can't make ends meet. They can't pay all their bills. They can't pay for the food and the supplies. They can't pay for the cardboard and the paper and the plastic spoons. They can't pay for all the sugar packages and all the cream packages. They can't pay for all this stuff. So they fire people. Minimum wage is up. They're attacked for gouging. Taxes are up. Regulations are up. You wonder how people can even make it anymore. So what happens to you, Mr. and Mrs. Consumer? Shortages. Shortages. Because you cannot produce more product. You cannot produce more services under these circumstances. You have to pull back. So the economy contracts. Hiring contracts. And rather than defeat inflation, you feed inflation. And that's what happens. It creates this economic cycle that gets worse and worse and worse and worse. We call this, the general rubric for this is industrial policy. Industrial policy. That is, politicians and bureaucrats in faraway places determine policy, everything from assembly lines to oil fields, to ranches, to the growing of food on farms, to packaging, to trucking and delivering, to end prices. We call this industrial policy. And of course, the most autocratic regimes run industrial policies to control the people. That's who they are. That's what they do. But even some of them recognize they have to have some level of capitalism, market system. And we see that even places like communist China. But you kill development, you kill the creation of new products, you kill creativity, technological advances, because the capital is not available or it's too expensive to invest into these things. So prices are kept artificially low. Wages are kept artificially high. You have shortages. In some cases, like at gas stations, you have lines or you have Thursdays you can buy or even days and odd days. There has to be a method for distributing product and service. And you're substituting the market system, voluntary interaction, people who are responding rationally to what they're paying or what their expenses are, who understand their little piece of the world better than anybody else. You're substituting that with an iron-fisted bureaucracy driven by politicians. And so you create shortages. You create you create poverty. You create poverty. And the way the demagogue gets away with this is to say they're greedy. You even hear it from our guys. The drug companies are greedy. The oil companies are greedy. McDonald's is greedy. They're all greedy. That means you're greedy. Because average Americans are pulling the weight at every one of these businesses. Who do you think is drilling for oil? Who do you think's making the automobile? Who do you think's building a home? The various trades that are involved. Who do you think works at McDonald's? Who do you think drives the trucks to deliver this, that, and the other? We do. We do. Has nothing to do with greed. Again, I will ask you this test question. Test it against this, everything, when you hear Kamala Harris and the rest. How come the food companies weren't greedy 4 years ago? The packages didn't change. How come the fast food restaurants weren't greedy 4 years ago? How come this, that, the other product, the other service? How come they were reasonably priced? Affordable. Gasoline. 4 years ago. But all of a sudden, everybody's greedy. All of a sudden, everybody's greedy. Because all of a sudden, everybody's not greedy. Bidenomics is destroying the economy. The answer for Kamalanomics is price controls, wage controls. When you increase the minimum wage just because you can, or when you accuse people of gouging, this is the language of the demagogue. It's the language of the demagogue. And when we come back, what effect does open borders have when millions and millions of mostly poor people are pouring into the country on the economy?